Thank you, Dr. Shulkin, Secretary Bob, Caitlin. You can kiss your family and friends goodbye and put miles between you. But at the same time, you carry them in your heart, your mind, your stomach, because you do not live in a world, but a little world lives in you. Frederick Buechner.
2 years, 7 months, and 25 days. That's how long it's been since we lost our son Daniel to suicide. 969 days to go through the what ifs, the should haves, the if we knew then what we know now scenarios. If you want to know not just what went wrong, you want to fix it so it doesn't ever happen again. Our story, Daniel's story, is definitely not the story of every veteran's suicide. But we can definitely learn from Daniel's story. His is a story of opportunities not given, opportunities not taken, and some opportunities that were simply not yet available. Daniel was living in California when he joined the Army National Guard in 2003. He had his MOS training at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and was assigned to a military intelligence unit out of Long Beach, California. At the time, we were living and working in Phoenix. When Daniel deployed in 2004, it was in advance of his own unit. He was assigned to a military police unit out of Fort Hood, Texas. He deployed to Iraq for 427 days, performed over 400 combat missions, and suffered innumerable concussive events. 3 weeks after returning home, he was at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, learning Arabic, with the hope of going back to Iraq to, in his words, right the wrongs I'd done.
What if, we ask ourselves?
Before he was called up again, he found his way into a position with the government contractor L3 in Washington, D.C., where he worked as an intelligence analyst handling the Levant area, the area of Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. In 2007, when L3 asked for volunteers to be boots on the ground, Daniel headed back to Iraq, confident that he would be able to set things right.
We should have.
9 months later, Daniel came home visibly different, shaky, tired, smoking heavily, not sleeping, and hypervigilant. By this time, home for him was Arizona, and home for us was California. For the next 3 months, Daniel's Guard unit was at high risk of redeployment, and he lived in fear that his unit would be called up. We remember him telling us that he spent close to 2 hours on the phone with his commanding officer, pleading not to be sent back.
If we knew then what we know now.
During that same 3-month period, Daniel attempted to get access to the Phoenix VA healthcare system. Due to his unit's inactive Ready Reserve status, VA mistakenly told him that he had to be seen at a DoD facility, and of course, the DoD said he had to be seen at VA. From January to August of 2008, Daniel was seen by a mental health care provider at the Phoenix VA, and we believe that he felt it was a good path for him. But in September of 2008, that provider left VA. Daniel was never reassigned another therapist because of a chronically understaffed department, even though his chart was flagged as a patient experiencing active suicidal ideation. Daniel sought treatment from a community mental health care provider and used his wife's insurance benefits to cover some, but not all of the cost.
If we'd only.
At this point, we began looking into PTSD programs outside of VA and found a facility near Boston that had reported good results with inpatient care. We gave the information to Daniel, and he promised to call, but when we later asked him about it, he said that they told him he was not a candidate. At the time, we did not understand, but later learned that he feared a one flew over the cuckoo's nest outcome and had probably refused to accept inpatient treatment. So he continued with his community therapist. We told him that we would welcome the opportunity to be a part of his treatment process. He said that he talked to his therapist about it, but continually came up with excuses as to why it couldn't happen right then.
We should have.
Though Daniel kept in constant contact with us, mainly through long weekly phone calls, but occasional visits, us to Phoenix, he and his wife to California, he became adept at being the person that he thought we needed him to be and downplayed most of his physical and mental health care problems. His wife would occasionally offer a medical excuse as to why he could or could not do something. We were at a loss as to how to get answers to most of our questions.
What if?
The depth of the love of parents for their children cannot be measured. It is like no other relationship. It exceeds concern for life itself. The love of a parent for a child is continuous and transcends heartbreak and disappointment. James E. Faust.
You cannot stop being a parent, and you can't stop being a child. You can stop being somebody's wife or husband. So why is it that parents are cut out of their children's life at critical points like this? Because some lawyers got together and came up with a privacy law that is so misinterpreted that not a single one of Daniel's providers thought they had the authority, the duty, even the obligation to call us and talk to us about what he might not be telling them, about what insight we might be able to offer, assistance, financial or otherwise, that we might be able to give. We saw two options. Option one, we could find a way to declare Daniel legally incompetent and unable to make rational decisions for himself with regards to his mental health, and thereby force him into inpatient treatment. We would have also, though, had to have convinced a judge that his wife was incapable of recognizing this incompetence in Daniel. This option would undoubtedly have had some very long-term downsides for any future relationship with both of them, and really would have been impossible to accomplish. Option two was to walk on eggshells and try to pry information out of anyone that we thought had any insights. So we chose option two.
If only we'd.
Under current privacy laws, a mental health care provider, any health care provider, has to ask their patient if they have permission to discuss their condition with anyone else. Do we know at what exact point in time a mind becomes incapable of making the best decision for itself? Shouldn't the fact that a person is experiencing suicidal ideation be cause for some consideration that others should be consulted about the level of treatment required? Why are we unwilling to say to somebody, you are not capable of making this decision about yourself, for yourself, right now? You need someone else to trust to make it. If there is anyone in this room who has not read Daniel's final letter, which is easily found online through the Gawker website, we urge and encourage you to do so. It offers critical insight into the state of mind of a veteran on the verge of committing the final act, and is best summarized by Daniel's own words.
Too trapped in a war to be at peace, too damaged to be at war. None of us got where we are solely by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We got here because somebody, a parent, a teacher, an Ivy League crony, or a few nuns, bent down and helped us pick up our boots. Thurgood Marshall.
We have been making the rounds in DC looking for ways to formalize an approach that we call the support network. We feel every new service member must be afforded the opportunity to provide a list of people, say 5 or 10, that they consider the people that they would turn to with good news or bad. The Department of Defense would then take that information, put it on a listserv that would routinely send out generic information to that network. Information like, what's basic training like? What happens when a unit is called up for deployment? What deployment means? What physical, psychological, and transitional issues returning service members are experiencing? It would include specific links with more in-depth information about these issues, and highlight national and local organizations that their service member, veteran, family member, or friend could turn to for additional assistance and information. This knowledge would save lives by empowering those in the support network with the confidence necessary to know what to say, how to say it, and where to find appropriate resources. The receiving party could opt out at any time, and the service member would be notified. Likewise, if the service member deleted a previously listed name, that person would be notified. This would have been a huge red flag for us. If we knew then what we know now, would Daniel be alive today? The Department of Defense must provide a more in-depth period of transition, not just a 5-day, 8 hours a day round of PowerPoint presentations. It took 6 weeks of intense training to turn our son from a civilian to a soldier. It should certainly take at least 6 weeks to help him transition back
to civilian life. It is an odd paradox that a society which can now speak openly and unabashedly about topics that were once unspeakable still remains largely silent when it comes to mental illness. Glenn Close.
As a society, we have not prepared ourselves as regards our mental well-being. We need to begin with our children today and provide them with regular mental health screenings, just as we do their physical and dental screenings, so that it becomes a way of life. Think of it this way: children flying today think airport TSA screenings are perfectly normal. But to do these mental health screenings, we need to drastically improve our mental health infrastructure. Not only do we require more mental health providers at all levels, we need to provide expanded mental health training to other healthcare professionals. Specifically, we see the need to increase mental health training in internal medicine, emergency medicine, OBGYN, primary care, and pediatric specialty programs. We need to provide access to mental health training programs for teachers and coaches. We need to bring mental health issues out of the closet, out from being the stepchild of physical medicine, and give it fiscal parity. The only way we're going to improve mental health care amongst our service members and veterans is to destigmatize it in our society as a whole. We must talk about the brain as an organ that has its own set of diseases and maladies, as does every other part of the body. We need to engage our full community. We can do that best for our veterans by refocusing VA healthcare to its core mission of being a center of excellence for war-related injuries. We need to have a team of highly trained primary care physicians at VA coordinating the best possible care for each veteran. By referring our veterans out into their communities for everyday care that we all have in common, our many highly qualified medical professionals and better staffed medical facilities will see and treat our veterans and send reports back to VA. This will free up our VA facilities to see and treat conditions that are specific to our service members and veterans, notably in the fields of mental health and rehab. It will continue the VA tradition of identifying symptom clusters, provide greater numbers of research opportunities, and we believe increase the number of eligible veterans willing to seek VA care while providing greater transparency of the agency itself.
So,
before you have to say, if I knew then what I know now, this is what you need to do.
Get in the discussion about mental health from a privacy law, education, and fiscal parity viewpoint. There are several pieces of mental health legislation working their way through both houses of this, through both the Senate and the House at this time.
Insist on DoD implementation of our service member support network and a dramatic increase in the time and assistance devoted to post-deployment, discharge, and transition issues.
Insist on a refocus of VA healthcare to become a center of excellence for war-related injuries. Thank you.
Thank you.